They brought 10 lawyers to break you, 10 trained minds ready to bury you in strategies and paperwork, but you didn't flinch. You made one phone call, one calculated move, and the entire courtroom shifted. Those lawyers, once confident and polished, walked out shaken because your call ripped open every lie they built, exposing their weakness and cracking their armor until they realized they weren't facing a person. They were facing a force. You didn't overpower them with chaos. You dismantled them with intelligence so precise it felt dangerous, leaving them terrified of how easily you turned their advantage into ash. And before we go deeper into this dark, unfiltered truth, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe so we can reach 50,000 subscribers, and drop a comment with the number 11 to show you're ready for more. They walked into that courtroom believing numbers made them powerful. 10 lawyers, polished, rehearsed, confident. They thought a crowd would intimidate you, that their collective voices would drown yours. But you didn't need a crowd. You needed only a phone. One call, one move, one unstoppable truth, cutting through every lie they built. In that moment, the room shifted because the power dynamic flipped faster than they could blink. Your voice didn't rise. You didn't threaten. You simply dialed a number, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument they could have prepared. On the other end of that call was the truth they buried, the evidence they hid, and the names they hoped you'd never speak. When the call connected, their faces drained of color, they finally understood. You weren't there to win. You were there to end everything they brought against you. That one call shattered them because it wasn't just information. It was domination. It was the kind of move only someone who has survived darker games would ever dare to play. You didn't outtalk them. You outplayed them. And when they realized how small they truly were compared to you, their confidence cracked like glass under a hammer. They expected noise, debates, objections, a war of words. Instead, they were met with a suffocating silence, the kind that crushes the lungs and exposes fear instantly. Each lawyer, prepared with pages of arguments, suddenly found themselves speechless. Their throats tightened, their thoughts scrambled, and their carefully designed strategies dissolved right in front of them. Silence is powerful when it's intentional, and your silence was a message. You're already defeated. They looked at each other, waiting for someone to step forward, someone to speak up, someone to salvage the moment. Nobody did, because they all felt the same chill. Your silence carried more weight than their entire courtroom army. Their silence wasn't respect. It was fear. They were terrified to challenge someone whose calmness felt lethal. The room didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the one person who didn't need a single word to dominate the battlefield. Every courtroom has a moment the balance shifts. In your case, it wasn't a dramatic confession or a loud outburst. It was the way the air changed when you stepped forward, when you placed your phone down, when you looked them in the eye. They weren't just being challenged, they were being dismantled. Their hearts raced because something inside told them they'd underestimated you. That mistake cost them more than the case. It cost them the illusion of superiority they had built for years. Each lawyer felt the weight of being exposed, not as professionals, but as amateurs standing before someone who saw through everything they tried to hide. That moment broke them because it forced them to face the truth. They weren't fighting a normal opponent. They were standing against a force shaped by battles they'd never survive. You didn't just break their case. You broke their confidence, their pride, and the masks they wore to pretend they were in control. They thought they buried the past deep enough that no one would ever find it. But you weren't guessing. You knew exactly who had fallen, who had been silenced, and who had been sacrificed in the shadows of their twisted game. Your call wasn't just evidence. It was a resurrection of every truth they tried to kill. One by one, each death resurfaced like a ghost pulling at their throats. The names they avoided, the stories they erased, the people they allowed to disappear, all returned because of your single calculated move. You didn't just expose facts, you exposed the blood on their hands. Watching their reactions was like watching a row of statues crack from pressure. Their breathing changed. Their eyes shook. They weren't afraid of losing the case. They were terrified that the past they murdered was now alive, staring directly at them through you. They entered the arena thinking they were the apex predators, new, ambitious, hungry. But they made the fatal mistake of challenging someone who sharpened their teeth long before these lawyers ever earned their degrees. They were beginners in a world you mastered years ago. You could see it instantly, the impatience, the arrogance, the assumption that youth equals strength. But experience is a weapon they never learned how to defend against. Every move they made was predictable. Every tactic they prepared was something you'd countered 1,000 times in battles, far darker than any courtroom. They were players. You were the one who built the game long before they even knew it existed. And when they finally realized who they stood against, their confidence didn't fade. It collapsed. Their strategy was flawless. On paper, 10 lawyers, synchronized arguments, pre-planned counterattacks. But all of that became useless the second your phone call detonated their entire foundation, because strategy means nothing when the truth is stronger than the lies it's built on. In a single moment, every defense they created turned irrelevant. Their notes became meaningless. Their rehearsed lines became useless. And their months of preparation burned away like paper in fire. Your call wasn't a move, it was an execution, a surgical strike that severed every escape route they had. What destroyed them wasn't the evidence itself. It was the realization that you had been 10 steps ahead from the very beginning. They weren't losing. They were already lost long before the trial even began. Their expressions told the whole story. Sweat forming at the temples, lips trembling, eyes darting to the door, as if planning an escape they knew would never work. Every mark on their face revealed a deeper truth. They weren't ready to face someone like you. Their fear wasn't loud. It was quiet and paralyzing. The kind of fear that sinks its claws into the spine and refuses to let go. They tried to hide it behind fake professionalism, but masks don't survive under real pressure. And you applied pressure like it was an art form. The marks weren't just on their faces. They were on their pride, their careers, and the illusions they built around their own competence. You didn't just scare them. You rewrote the way they see themselves. They came in as professionals, experts, masters of law. But by the end, they weren't lawyers anymore. They were prisoners of the very game they tried to manipulate. And the worst part? They knew it. You didn't trap them with force. You trapped them with truth, with knowledge, with the kind of leverage that turns even the strongest into desperate followers. You held the keys to every lie, every secret, every buried detail they hoped would stay hidden forever. They weren't arguing. They were surviving. And when professional confidence turns into personal fear, you know the game has already been won. One by one they walked out, not because they were defeated, but because they were exposed. They didn't lose the case. They lost the ability to keep standing in front of you. The truth you revealed didn't just break them. It burned through their roles, their reputations, and their identities. You watched them leave the courtroom like soldiers retreating after realizing their enemy wasn't human. Their arguments dissolved into silence. Their voices dried up. Their authority collapsed beneath the weight of what you unleashed. People don't walk away from cases like that unless the truth is too powerful to face. And you were the one holding it. Their world wasn't built on justice or skill. It was built on manipulation, pressure, and deception. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, crumble instantly when the right truth strikes them. And your strike wasn't gentle. It was catastrophic. The system they depended on, connections, influence, hidden favors, collapsed in seconds. They realized that the structure they trusted wasn't strong at all. It was fragile glass, and your phone call was the hammer. When the truth hits that hard, it doesn't just break a case. It breaks the people who lived inside that lie. You didn't threaten them. You didn't raise your voice. Yet every lawyer knew you held power over something far bigger than the courtroom. You had information, real, dangerous information, that could end careers, families, reputations, even lives. Your calmness scared them more than any aggression ever could, because only someone who controls the entire circle, who sees every move, every weakness, can speak softly while holding absolute power, and you held it effortlessly. They weren't just fighting a case. They were fighting the one person who could decide their fate with a single command. They entered thinking this was just legal work, a job, a challenge, a high-profile case. But they walked into a game with rules they didn't understand. A game where you were the architect, not the opponent. Once you revealed the truth, the doors closed, not physically, but mentally, because now they were part of something they couldn't run from. Their names were tied to this. Their actions were recorded. Their secrets were exposed. They were trapped not by force, but by consequence. And you stood at the center, silent, calculating, in full control. They expected shouting matches and aggressive arguments. Instead, they got surgical silence, cold precision, and a voice so controlled it felt like a blade sliding under their skin. You didn't overpower them with volume. You suffocated them with accuracy. Every word you spoke was a strategic strike. No wasted sentences, no loud threats, just facts delivered like bullets. They couldn't fight back because your calmness left no room for doubt or escape. Every defense they built fell apart without you needing to lift your tone. That's the kind of dominance that leaves scars, not on the body, but on the mind. Before your call, they were confident, arrogant even. They believed they had the upper hand. But when the truth spilled from that speaker, everything inside them changed. Their confidence didn't fade slowly. It dropped instantly, like a trapdoor opening beneath their feet. That call didn't just reveal information. It revealed who you are. Someone who sees everything, knows everything, and moves with deadly precision. They weren't afraid of losing. They were afraid of you. Afraid of the person who could tear down 10 lives with one action. Confidence is loud. Terror is silent. And they became very, very quiet. Some opponents you battle. Others you avoid at all costs. You were the second type, and they learned that too late. They challenged someone who doesn't just fight. They dominate. Someone who studies enemies like maps and executes strategy like war. You weren't in that courtroom to prove anything. You were there to remind them why certain people should never be provoked. They came prepared for a legal fight. But you weren't fighting. You were demonstrating the difference between amateurs who rely on numbers and a mastermind who relies only on intelligence and precision. In the end, they didn't just lose. They learned why some people should never, ever be underestimated. The moment you entered, the room changed. Not because you shouted, not because you raised your hand, but because power carries a weight that lies cannot endure. Every carefully constructed deception they had relied on felt fragile under your presence. as if their words could shatter before leaving their lips. Lies have short lifespans when someone like you walks in, and they knew it. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, scanning each other for reassurance that wasn't coming. Their confidence, so proudly worn like armor, faltered. Every plan, every tactic they rehearsed, became instantly transparent, flickering under the light of your scrutiny. The illusion they built to protect themselves from reality was burning fast. By the time you even spoke, fear had already claimed them. Power doesn't ask for permission, it commands attention. And in that moment, they realized their lies were worthless. You didn't just arrive, you arrived to dismantle everything they thought they controlled. It wasn't a physical act, it was psychological domination that bent their system to your will, their hierarchy, their strategy, their network of defenses. Everything they relied on for strength collapsed under the pressure of a single, precise move. They realized they were no longer players in control. They were puppets dancing to your rhythm. Every objection they tried to raise was already anticipated. Every move they attempted to reclaim was rendered irrelevant. They were forced into submission by your clarity, foresight, and lethal composure. Their carefully orchestrated world suddenly had a new ruler, and it wasn't them. The system they had built wasn't broken, it was exposed. And when everything designed to protect them is turned against them, there's no recovery. Kneeling isn't an option, it's instinct. And instinct is all that remained. 10 years of manipulation, cover-ups, and hidden agendas vanished in the space of a single revelation. They had perfected their stories, rehearsed their defenses, and buried evidence in layers so deep, even they believed it was untouchable. But the truth has a way of moving faster than deceit, and you delivered it like a missile. It didn't matter how many documents they filed or witnesses they called. One fact, one undeniable truth, destroyed the foundation of their empire. Confidence turned to panic, arrogance to regret, and their network of lies crumbled like sand through fingers too weak to hold it. In that instant, you were no longer fighting a case. You were rewriting history. A decade of deception collapsed because the wrong person found the key. And that person was you. Confidence is dangerous when misplaced. They had it in abundance, flaunting it as armor, but you didn't just dismantle it. You weaponized it against them. Every boast, every claim, every overreach became proof of their weakness. Their own certainty exposed the cracks you had been waiting for. They tried to fight it, to reclaim control, but the harder they pushed, the faster their confidence morphed into self-destruction. Every step they took, every argument they presented, only revealed them more clearly. You didn't need to attack. They were attacking themselves with their own arrogance. By the end, they realized that confidence without insight is dangerous, and when it's weaponized against you, it becomes a liability. You made their strength irrelevant by letting them expose themselves. The room was alive with their chatter and scheming until you crossed the threshold. Something unspoken shifted in the air. Strategy, coordination, rehearsal, all the armor they had painstakingly built evaporated as if it had never existed. You didn't just arrive, you delivered a verdict of dominance before a single word was spoken. They looked at you, eyes wide, searching for a weakness that wasn't there. Every lawyer trained to be unflinching suddenly faltered. Their first move, their opening defense, their calculated approach, irrelevant. The power of presence can topple armies, and you had it in full force. By the time they opened their mouths, it was too late. The energy, the authority, the unyielding focus you brought had already killed their defense. Their case had died before it began. You didn't even need to address them. The fear in their tone betrayed their thoughts. Small stutters, drawn-out pauses, shifting in seats. They were already defeated internally. Their minds raced, scrambling for a solution, a defense, a miracle that would never come. Every shaky syllable told a story. The story of overconfidence meeting precision, of arrogance meeting ruthlessness. They realized too late that the battlefield wasn't external. It was within themselves. You had already won the war in their heads before one word was uttered, and that internal collapse was the deadliest weapon, because fear inside the mind is invisible, insidious, and unrelenting, and they had nowhere to run. They thought every secret was buried, every vulnerability shielded. But you hunted with precision, reading patterns, detecting hesitation, identifying the one flaw in their armor that everyone else missed. And when you exposed it, the entire structure quaked. One name, one connection, one overlooked detail became the linchpin that unhinged their strategy. Every lawyer felt it, the chain reaction of disaster. What they considered hidden was suddenly under a microscope, and their panic was unavoidable. Exposing a weak link doesn't just destroy a plan, it destroys confidence, morale, and unity. And you made them witness it firsthand. They had studied fear, theorized about it, trained to suppress it. Yet the moment you acted, the textbook definition of fear came alive. It wasn't cinematic or exaggerated. It was raw, immediate, paralyzing, the kind of fear that grips the gut and freezes the tongue. They had imagined scenarios, rehearsed threats, built contingency plans, but nothing prepared them for someone who could think 10 steps ahead and move like a shadow in daylight. Their professional facade cracked, revealing trembling, panic, and desperation beneath. That day they realized fear wasn't theoretical. It was something tangible, delivered with the force of an unrelenting master, and they were utterly exposed. They came with weapons, plans, and confidence. They assumed they were hunting, but the truth hit like lightning. You weren't defending. You were the force itself. Every move they made bounced off your presence. Every attack rebounded, and every effort to corner you failed before it began. You weren't reacting. You were inevitable. They weren't in control of the pace, the pressure, or the outcome. You dictated every rhythm, every shift, every consequence. And in that realization, their arrogance dissolved into dread. They weren't hunting a person. They were standing in the path of a storm, unpredictable, relentless, and deadly. You didn't need to touch them, threaten them physically, or raise your voice. Every motion, every word, every glance dismantled them from the inside out. Their defense fell apart, not because of force, but because of authority, intellect, and psychological mastery. You applied pressure like an invisible vice, slowly, steadily, inevitably. They began to crumble, exposing flaws, fears, and insecurities. You made them fold without aggression, without violence, without mercy. Breaking someone's backbone mentally is far more permanent than physical power. And you proved it. They believed their case was strong, unbreakable, defended by 10 professionals. But all it took was your presence to turn their empire into dust. Every argument, every exhibit, every carefully placed word dissolved under the weight of your mastery. You didn't even need evidence at first. Your dominance alone caused panic, hesitation, and mistakes. The case they trusted so blindly crumbled without a fight, showing that control doesn't come from numbers. It comes from intelligence and presence. By the end, they weren't just losing, they were watching the entire world. They built collapse like a sandcastle against a tidal wave. Some truths hit harder than physical blows. When you revealed what no one else could, the room went silent. The lawyers were paralyzed, incapable of responding, incapable of denying, incapable of moving forward. Every defensive plan evaporated. It wasn't a threat, it was inevitability. The truth you wielded exposed their lies, betrayals, and mistakes, leaving them exposed, defenseless, and trapped. They realized that nothing in their training could prepare them for someone who knew everything. Frozen isn't just silence. It's the death of confidence, the end of strategy, and the ultimate acknowledgement of defeat. They brought their proof, their witnesses, their airtight documents. But you transformed it into a liability. Every fact they thought was a shield became a weapon against them. Every page, every signature, every testimony became evidence of incompetence or hypocrisy. It wasn't luck, it was mastery. You anticipated, redirected, and recontextualized their strength, turning their own tools into instruments of collapse. They realized their advantage wasn't an advantage at all. It was the very thing that would destroy them. That's the difference between strategy and domination, knowing how to use someone else's strength to finish them. They believed their plans, their structure, their coordination equaled power. But power isn't strategy, it's dominance. You taught them that lesson in the most brutal way, without raising your voice, without breaking a sweat, simply by being sharper, faster, and deadlier. They had been playing a game they didn't understand, thinking skill alone would win. But dominance doesn't negotiate, it doesn't explain, and it doesn't falter. You executed every move like a master and forced them to realize that no amount of planning could save them from someone who plays the game on a completely different level. Strategy loses to dominance, and they learned it too late. The last move wasn't loud. It was decisive. The final revelation, the final calculation, the final display of control left everyone in stunned silence. 10 lawyers, countless plans, and a world of confidence, all silenced by one unstoppable force. They had nowhere left to hide, nothing left to defend, and no words left to speak. They weren't defeated. They were annihilated, psychologically, emotionally, strategically. And you didn't just end their argument. You ended the entire battlefield before it could breathe. The room didn't recover. The memory didn't fade. And they never forgot that you were the force that could silence 10 voices with a single calculated strike.